Why church? Why church? It's a question that is asked often, but often it's not in the church, right? Because we're like, well, what do you mean, why church? I get in my car on Sunday mornings and I drive to church and I go to church. And then during the pandemic, then that kind of messed up that idea, right? Because we were no longer getting in our cars and driving to church. We were now putting our pajamas on and getting our cups of coffee and getting in front of our computer. Is that church? Why church? It's a question that people around us ask, maybe in hushed tones, because, after all, we wouldn't want people to feel as if we're some kind of heathen or heretic or a person of no faith. Why church? It's a question that is being asked around us. It's a question that might not be asked in the church, even though some of us have been asking it. But it's an important question for us to be not just asking, but talking about in these days. The ancient church was a community of people. In Greek, it's the ecclesia, the gathered ones who are called to be God's people together. This early community was a community around eating and around fellowship. It was a community around prayer. It was a community around the story of this man named Jesus. That's what kind of guided them together. That's what gathered them in these early days. So it had this way of being that was very vivid, very concrete. And then, of course, I'm not going to necessarily bore you with a long history of church, but over time, things changed and developed. This early community that was suffering persecution seasonally now became the religion of the state. And it had status, and that status began to create its own form of being church. But at its cornerstone, it was still about a people gathered together, a people called out for God's purposes. It wasn't a building, it wasn't a geographical location, it was a people. I would venture to say, as we ask the question today, we must go back to that early understanding of being a people. So we together are church. Whether you're watching this on digital or you're sitting on our pews on the main campus of this beautiful sanctuary, wherever you are, we God's people, we called out together for God's purposes. We hungry for divine life, for transcendence. That hunger, a key aspect of what it means to be human. After all, we can see across time and space, anthropologists remind us that this kind of way of being, this so-called religion, right, is part and parcel of what it means to be society and humanity. It seems like from very early on in our evolutionary life, there was this need for ritual. There was the need for caring for one another when one was dying. There was this need for myth and mythical stories to help us explain what was happening in the world. Barbara Haggerty, in her book, Fingerprints of God, went on a search for that commonality, a search for God in the midst of science. She decided to join scientists in studying different religious traditions and what's happening in the brain when folks were experiencing a religious encounter, a spiritual encounter. Some might even call them a mystical encounter. Whether you were a Native American person in a sweat lodge or a Buddhist monk meditating, or you were a Pentecostal Christian during a worship service, or a Roman Catholic Christian during Mass, or a Muslim person who went to have their time of prayer 5 times a day, something happens in our brains. The same part of the brain is activated. And he provides comfort, provides strength. He provides a certain sense of self and identity that's common across all of these religious traditions. There's something about being human and our need for divine life. And for those of us who follow Jesus, we claim that the way in which we respond to that inner hunger is through the story of a God who becomes human in the flesh, in the person of Jesus. And it is this Jesus whose life, death, and resurrection then inspires us and calls us together. It is that person that makes us church. Yes, makes us church. In today's passage, Jesus gives us a description of what this church is. And he uses a very vivid image. He uses an image of salt and light. In other words, an image of things that were common to the day that people could really relate to. Salt helps us with taste, helps preserve, but salt also helps brighten the flavor. It helps us get at the real flavor in meals. Salt also, I learned this week, can help us to avoid illness. It's a fascinating part of human society. And we know light, right? We know that no matter how obscure a room is or how dark the room is, that just the smallest little bit of light reveals, brightens, makes known. And so why church? We are the community of people who are salt and light in the world. We who recognize that inner hunger for transcendence, and that inner hunger then connects us to one another. As Jesus told us over and over again, we becoming one people, we leaving behind our tendency to want to do it on our own. And now we are together. We are community. As we say here at First-Plymouth, we are a spiritual community. A community connected to the transcendent of the world. And that transcendence is not just a vertical relationship, but it's a horizontal relationship. And in that relationship, as called out once for God's purposes, we then becoming salt and light in the world. We becoming a people who help brighten, who help bring taste in the world. We becoming a people who help reveal things in the world, reveal beauty, reveal joy, reveal peace, reveal new life. We are people together as a community, helping our communities beyond the walls of the sanctuary spaces to see God in new ways, to recognize the voice within themselves, that longing that's at the cornerstone of what it means to be human. We coming in with our salt and our light and helping them see that they too can satisfy that hunger for community, for love, for compassion. We modeling that for the people that we encounter. This practice of church, going beyond the 1 hour of worship on Sunday morning and into a way of life in the world. So as I remind you often, just think of yourselves as a community walking in the day-to-day life, in our workplaces, in the market spaces, in our family life. And how are we going to be that people that bring salt and light? How are we providing all around us this unity, this community that helps brighten, that help the taste come out, joy come out, love come out? How are we going to be a people that help reveal goodness and grace and mercy and forgiveness? How are we going to be committed together, remind one another of those realities? In a world that so often seems so disconnected, so individualistic, at times maybe even lonely. Think about it. What does it mean for us as God's people? Not as a sense of a badge of honor, no, but as a sense as a people who have had this encounter, who's recognized that hunger deep within us, whose brain scans would show that part of our brain being activated each time we sing songs of praise, each time we gather to hear a word proclaimed, like we're doing in this moment. Each time we stop and meditate upon the goodness of the transcendent before us. Imagine us sharing that reality together. And with each step of the way, we lighting the way. We helping people find a pathway. We providing an opportunity for humans to satisfy their hunger for transcendence, even if they don't know it. Now, will church look like it does today? Possibly not. Most likely not. It will look very different in the next 100, 200, 300, 500 years. But at its core, it's going to be a group of people called out for the purposes of being salt and light in the world, for the purposes of helping other humans and all of creation experience transcendence, love, beauty, joy, community. May we commit to that reality each and every day. May we sit back and be able to answer, why church? No matter who asks us, even our own selves, day to day. Go be salt and light. The world needs it. We need it. We called out ones. Amen.